My name is Lena Hartley, and the day I married Damien Hale was the day every choice I thought I had, every piece of freedom slipped through my fingers. People imagine marriage as joy, as love, as softness. Mine was a transaction, a lifeline thrown to someone drowning, not for romance, not for companionship, simply survival. My stepmother, Marissa, orchestrated the entire thing with cold efficiency. She called it an opportunity, but the truth was clearer than glass. She wanted a debt-free life, and I was the payment. My father had died leaving us in financial ruin, but she never said our ruin, just hers, her future, her comfort. The Hale family was wealthy, influential, untouched by the storms that swallowed ordinary people whole, and Damien? He was their perfectly sculpted heir, sharp, polished, unreadable, a man carved from silence. When Marissa announced that the Hale family had chosen me, my throat tightened. I didn't want a man who didn't choose me. Worse, I didn't want a life dictated by signatures and expectations, but choices weren't something I had many of. I still remember the cold bite of the pen in my hand as I sat across from Damien in the small room where our marriage papers were laid out. He watched me with eyes I couldn't read, distant, calculating, but not unkind. Before signing, he leaned in, his voice low and steady. "Don't worry, Lena. You don't need a husband, and I don't need a wife. We'll live together, but I won't touch you. I won't ask for anything. This won't be a real marriage. It's just logistics." Logistics. That was the only reason I said yes. We sealed a contract. No intimacy, no expectations, no obligation. Just two strangers under one roof, bound by necessity and silence. The Hale estate was beautiful, grand, and suffocating. Marble floors that echoed too loudly, hallways that swallowed sound, and a man who moved like a ghost. Damien worked late, so late I often wondered if he slept at all. He came home after midnight, shoulders tense, jaw tight, the weight of an empire pressed into the lines of his face. I stayed in the guest room that had been designated as mine, reading, writing, pretending the world was bigger than the walls around me. We did not share meals. We did not share conversations. We barely even shared glances. To the world, to the cameras, to the Hale family, yes, we looked like a married couple, a polished pair, but inside the house, we were nothing but co-inhabitants, held together by paper promises. And honestly, at first, that was enough. At least I had space. At least I had dignity. Until the night he broke it. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. I had showered early, slipping into a simple, pale blue nightdress, soft and loose. My hair was still damp, brushing my shoulders as I sat by the window reading. The house was still, silent. Then the front door slammed. I froze. Footsteps followed, heavy, uneven, dragging across the polished floor. My pulse jumped, beating too quickly against my ribs. The footsteps came closer, and then my door burst open. Damien stood in the doorway, framed by the hall light. His usually pristine shirt hung untucked, buttons undone, tie loose around his neck. The smell of an expensive whiskey clung to him, sharp and unmistakable. His eyes were glassy, his breath uneven. "Lena," he slurred softly, his lips curling into something like a sad smile. "Why do you always hide from me?" My stomach dropped. This wasn't him. Damien was controlled, composed, silent. But now he looked lost. "You promised," I whispered, pushing myself off the bed. His stumble towards me, reaching out. His fingertips brushed my shoulder before sliding clumsily down my arm. My body went rigid. My breath caught, trapped between fear and disbelief. "Damien, stop!" But he didn't. He reached for the zipper at the back of my nightdress, his fingers fumbling. Cold fear shot through me. My hands trembled, my voice cracked as I shoved him back with all the strength I had. "Don't you dare! You swore you wouldn't!" For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. The haze of alcohol parted, and he saw me, really saw me. The terror, the panic, the betrayal. His hands dropped. His expression shifted. Not anger, not frustration, but something far more human. Shame. Deep, strangling shame. He stepped back, then again, then turned around and left the room, slamming the door behind him. I collapsed on the bed, knees giving out, heart shaking. Tears spilled down my cheeks in hot, uncontrollable waves. That night, I hated him. I hated him more than anyone I had ever hated. I expected arrogance. I expected indifference. I expected him to pretend nothing happened. But the next morning, Damien didn't look at me, not once. He didn't speak, he didn't linger, he didn't even sit at the dining table where we were supposed to pretend to be a couple. He left early, and that night he did not return to his bedroom. I heard the couch springs creak downstairs. 7 times, 8, every time he turned restlessly. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the memory of his shame-filled eyes haunting me. The whiskey bottles that used to clutter the bar, gone. His clothes, no alcohol scent. The silence between us remained, but it was different, not empty, heavy. Guilt pressed into every inch of it. Small changes. The first sign came the day I caught a cold. A box of cold medicine appeared on my nightstand. No note, no words, just quiet acknowledgement. When I burned my hand cooking, I found a box of bandages on the counter the next morning. When I twisted my ankle slipping on the stairs, Damien appeared out of nowhere, no word spoken, and lifted me into his arms before I could protest. His touch was steady, gentle, careful. He didn't try to hold me longer than necessary. He didn't let his eyes linger. He didn't use the moment. He simply carried me. More time passed, more small gestures, more quiet attempts at making things right. One evening, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Why are you doing this?" I asked as he wrapped a fresh bandage around my ankle. He froze, his fingers stilled. Slowly, painfully slowly, he lifted his eyes to mine. They weren't cold, they weren't guarded, they were broken. "Because I hurt you," he whispered, "because I broke the only promise I made to you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I can't—" His voice cracked. "I can't live with myself if I don't try to make this right." I wanted to stay angry. I wanted to remind him of the fear, but all I saw in his eyes was remorse, real, raw remorse, and maybe something else, something gentler, something human.
The days that followed were quieter than before. Quieter, but not empty. Something had shifted, something subtle, fragile like a glass thread stretched between us, trembling but unbroken. I didn't forgive Damien, not yet. Maybe not for a long time, but I could no longer pretend nothing had changed. The silent apology. I began noticing things I hadn't before, small traces of effort he left behind like breadcrumbs. He started waking earlier, long before sunrise, his footsteps deliberately soft so they wouldn't disturb me. He brewed a pot of coffee every morning, but never drank it until I had taken mine first, as if waiting for a permission I never verbally gave. At night, I heard him moving around downstairs. The bar remained untouched, bottles unopened. He stayed late in his office, sometimes pacing, sometimes typing with restless urgency. I could feel the tension leaking through the walls, a kind of storm he refused to unleash near me. He was trying, quietly, almost painfully. And yet, neither of us spoke about that night. It hovered in the air between us, an uninvited guest, not gone, not forgiven, just waiting, like a wound healing slowly but still tender to the touch. One afternoon, I stepped out of my room and nearly collided with him in the hallway. Damien froze. I froze. Our eyes met, unexpectedly close. His hair was slightly messy and dark circles sat under his eyes, remnants of nights spent on the couch downstairs. He looked different, softer somehow, stripped of the polished armor he wore around everyone else. He stepped back immediately, creating space for me. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Not for the narrow hallway, not for the near collision, but for something heavier. The apology wasn't complete, but it lingered in the air like smoke drifting from a candle. I nodded but said nothing. Words felt too big, too difficult, and we passed each other with the weight of unspoken things pulling our steps. A house without power. The moment everything shifted began on a stormy evening. Wind howled through the trees, and the sky flashed with rolling lightning. I sat by my window watching the storm, tracing raindrops against the cold glass. Then, the lights went out. The entire house plunged into darkness. For a moment, the silence felt alive. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I grabbed a candle and lit it, its soft glow pushing back the shadows. The flame flickered across the walls, warm but fragile. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed a thin strip of light at the bottom of the dining room door, the reflection of my candle. Damien was there, sitting alone at the long wooden table. His posture was rigid, shoulders tense, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. The flickering candlelight made shadows dance across his face, revealing exhaustion carved so deeply it almost looked painful. He didn't look up at first, but then he sensed me. He always did. His eyes lifted slowly, uncertainty flickering in them. "Lena," he breathed, almost as if speaking my name required effort. "I didn't think you'd come downstairs." I hesitated, but entered anyway, placing my candle on the table. The flame cast a soft halo around us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The storm raged outside. The house groaned. The silence felt immense, but not suffocating. Then Damien exhaled, his voice low, breaking the quiet. "If I could take back that night, I would. Every second of it. I don't deserve your kindness or your patience, but I swear to you, Lena," his voice cracked, fragile, "I will spend the rest of my life proving I can change. I just need the chance to." I blinked as tears gathered in my eyes, not because I forgave him, but because the sincerity in his voice hit me like a slow, deep ache. I reached across the table before my mind caught up with my hand. It was instinct, emotion, something soft that tugged at me despite everything. My fingers brushed his hand. He stiffened, not with arrogance, not with desire, but with shock. Then, slowly, so slowly, he relaxed under my touch. "I don't want promises you can't keep," I whispered. My voice shook despite my efforts to steady it. "But honesty, respect, if we can have that, maybe we can start again." His eyes softened. Something raw and real flickered there. Hope. A hesitant, trembling hope that made my chest tighten. "Okay," he murmured, voice barely audible. "Honesty. Respect. Whatever you need, Lena, I'll give it." From that night onward, the changes weren't dramatic. They were small, almost invisible unless you were paying close attention. But I was paying attention now. Damien didn't rush things. He didn't force conversations. He didn't invade my space. Instead, he showed up. In the morning, he made 2 cups of coffee, one exactly the way I liked it. No question, no comment. He simply placed it on the kitchen counter before leaving for work. He fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, the one that I had been ignoring for days because I didn't want to bother him. He started leaving earlier for work so he wouldn't disturb my quiet mornings. He cooked breakfast sometimes, burning at least 1 dish every single attempt. I laughed once, a short, soft laugh I didn't intend to let slip, and the way he looked at me then, as if the sound changed something inside him, made heat rise to my cheeks. We began talking, really talking, about insignificant things at first, then childhood memories, failures, dreams, loneliness. I learned that Damien's silence wasn't arrogance, it was habit, built after years of being taught that emotions were weaknesses. I learned that he hated storms because they reminded him of nights waiting for a father who never came home sober. And I learned that he had been alone long before we married. The more he shared, the more those walls inside me that I built to survive began to soften. Not crumble, not disappear, just soften. One afternoon, I stepped out of my room and nearly collided with him in the hallway. Damien froze. I froze. Our eyes met, unexpectedly close. His hair was slightly messy and dark circles sat under his eyes, remnants of nights spent on the couch downstairs. He looked different, softer somehow, stripped of the polished armor he wore around everyone else. He stepped back immediately, creating space for me. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Not for the narrow hallway, not for the near collision, but for something heavier. The apology wasn't complete, but it lingered in the air like smoke drifting from a candle. I nodded but said nothing. Words felt too big, too difficult, and we passed each other with the weight of unspoken things pulling at our steps. One evening, I walked into the living room and found him sitting on the floor surrounded by pieces of a table lamp. The old one in the hallway had stopped working weeks ago. "What are you doing?" I asked. He looked up, almost sheepishly. "Trying to fix this. I thought you might like it back in the hallway." A laugh slipped before I could stop it. "You have no idea what you're doing, do you?" "Not even slightly," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. I sat beside him on the floor, close but not too close. He passed me a screw and smiled, really smiled for the first time since we'd met. Not the polite, empty curve of lips he used with business partners or family. This one was real, soft, human, and something inside me shifted. Something warm, something dangerous, something new. The shift between us didn't happen overnight. It wasn't sudden, dramatic, or obvious to anyone but us. It grew slowly, like warmth spreading through a room in winter. Quiet, steady, unnoticed until you suddenly realized you weren't cold anymore. Learning each other's silence. Life inside the Hale house no longer felt like walking through shadows. Instead of avoiding each other, we existed in the same spaces more comfortably. Sometimes I found Damien working in the living room instead of locking himself in his office. Laptop open, glasses perched on his nose, his hair slightly tousled from running his hands through it too many times. Once, when he looked particularly stressed, I made 2 mugs of chamomile tea and placed one beside him. He stared at it for a moment, then at me. "You didn't have to," he murmured. "I know," I said quietly, "but you look tired." He held my gaze, and something softened in his expression. "Thank you," he whispered. We didn't speak further, but the silence we shared wasn't awkward. It felt gentle. The dinner that wasn't supposed to matter. One evening, the Hale family unexpectedly changed their plans and insisted on a formal family dinner at the house, a private one, just them and us. A performance, of course, a show of the perfect couple. I dreaded it. I hadn't worn anything formal since the wedding. My dresses hung stiff and untouched in the wardrobe, symbols of a role I wasn't ready to play again. But Damien knocked gently on my door. When I opened it, he stood there holding a delicate silver box. "Lena," he said quietly, "I know you don't like these dinner events. I don't either, but you won't be alone." I hesitated. "What's that?" He opened the box. Inside was a simple bracelet, silver, minimal, elegant, not flashy, not expensive looking, just soft and thoughtful. "You don't have to wear it," he added quickly. I thought you might like something that's yours, not something chosen for you." My breath hitched. He wasn't handing me jewelry, he was handing me a choice. I fastened the bracelet myself, the cool metal resting lightly against my skin. Damien's eyes softened in a way that made my chest warm. "Thank you," I whispered. He shook his head. "No, Lena, thank you." The dinner. The Hale family arrived polished and perfect as always, Damien's mother with her diamond eyes and his father with his authoritative silence. I stayed close to Damien, not out of obligation but because I'd trusted him to stay close too. He noticed every small thing, how tense I became when his father spoke too sharply, how I picked at my food instead of eating, how I kept adjusting the bracelet on my wrist when I felt nervous. Without drawing attention, Damien shifted his chair closer to mine. Without touching me, he made me feel protected. For the first time, I didn't feel like a prop in their flawless facade. When the night ended, Damien walked me upstairs, not saying a word, but before I closed my door, he said softly, "You did great tonight." I didn't know a simple sentence could make my heart feel so full. Growing closer in the quietest ways. Our interactions became natural, unforced, unplanned. In the mornings, he sometimes lingered in the kitchen while I prepared breakfast, pretending to read the news but watching me from the corner of his eye. Once, I caught him smiling when he saw me humming while cooking. Another time, while I watered the plants on the balcony, he brought out a blanket and draped it over my shoulders when the wind turned cold. No words, just care. His actions became a language, one I slowly learned to understand. And without realizing it, I started speaking it back. I began making his favorite tea when he worked late. I left small thank you notes when he fixed things around the house. I started waiting for the sound of his footsteps when he came home each night. Not because I needed him, but because I wanted him to be safe. Because I wanted him to know he wasn't alone anymore. The night in the kitchen. One night, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs for water and found Damien in the kitchen, sitting in the dim light, elbows on the table, head bowed. He looked tired, exhausted in a way that pulled at something deep inside me. "Damien," I whispered. His head lifted, surprise flickering across his face. "Lena, you're awake." I stepped closer. "Are you okay?" He hesitated before answering. "Long day. Too many decisions, too much pressure." A humorless chuckle escaped him. "And too many people who expect me to be perfect." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said. I walked to the stove, poured another cup of warm water into a mug, and slid it to him. He stared at it for a moment, then at me, then down at his hands. "Why are you kind to me?" he asked softly. The question pierced me. "I'm not kind, I'm just not angry anymore." He looked up sharply. "Really?" I nodded. "Anger takes too much space, and I'm tired of carrying it." His throat worked as he swallowed. His eyes, usually so shielded, held something vulnerable, something open. "Lena," he whispered, "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to be someone you're not afraid to be around, someone you can trust." I took a slow breath. "You're becoming that person," I said quietly. His eyes softened, almost shining in the dim kitchen light. The silence between us warmed instead of iced. Then, without thinking, without planning, I reached out and gently placed my hand on top of his. A soft, tentative touch. His breath caught, his fingers twitched, but he didn't pull away. Neither did I. We stayed like that, hands touching, hearts trembling, for a long time, long enough for the quiet to feel like understanding instead of avoidance. In that moment, something shifted again. Not love, not yet, but something undeniably real, something alive. That night marked a new kind of closeness, not forced, not accidental, intentional. We shared small, intimate moments that weren't physical but meaningful. He began opening up about his past, how he grew up in a house where emotions were liabilities, how power came with expectations, how silence was his armor. And I told him about mine, about losing my father, about my stepmother's manipulation, about feeling like a burden in my own home. He listened, really listened, not with pity, not with judgment, with understanding. Sometimes, when he looked at me, there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, like he was seeing me not as a wife by contract, but as a woman he wanted to know. And slowly, gradually, dangerously, I started seeing him too.
Not the polished air, not the cold, distant man with sharp shoulders and sharper silences, not the reckless drunk who broke a promise, but Damien, the man who carried guilt like a shadow, the man who tried to change in the quietest ways, the man who fixed lamps badly and made terrible pancakes but still tried, the man who treated my trust like something fragile and precious. And I realized something terrifying. I didn't hate him anymore. Not even close.
The months that followed were a quiet revolution. Life inside the Hale house changed, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the small, consistent ways that truly matter. Each day we grew closer, building something neither of us expected, a bond that wasn't rushed, forced, or transactional. Winter came quietly, blanketing the city in frost and fog. Snow piled against the windows, and the house hummed with heaters and muffled sounds of the storm outside. Damien and I developed a routine. Mornings, coffee, quiet conversation, a glance or two across the table. Afternoons, silence or small acts of care. Evenings, dinner together. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to. One evening, snow fell heavier than usual. The power went out again. Candles lit the rooms in warm flickers. Damien and I sat at the dining table, our hands brushing over the waxed wood as we poured wine. Not for romance, not for obligation, but because being near each other didn't feel like a threat anymore. "Lena," he said softly, his breath misting in the candlelight. I've been thinking." I raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I've been thinking about what it means to be married, about what it means to truly care for someone, and I want to be better. I want to be someone who earns your trust every day." I studied him. His gray eyes, once sharp and unreadable, now held something fragile, vulnerable, honest. "You already are," I said quietly. He gave a small, incredulous laugh, shaking his head. "I'm not yet, but I'm trying, every single day." And in that moment, I realized that trust, real trust, wasn't given, it was built, slowly, patiently, with intention. And Damien was showing me in the smallest ways that he could be trusted. Weeks later, we had our first long conversation, not about obligations, not about accidents or chores, but about ourselves. We sat by the fireplace in the library, the flames crackling softly. I told him about my father, about the dreams I'd had before debt and contracts and survival. He listened, no judgment, no interruption. Then he shared stories I'd never heard, about being the heir to the Hale fortune and the suffocating expectations, about nights spent alone in this very house, and about mistakes he regretted, the ones he carried like scars no one could see. I realized then that Damien's arrogance had been armor. The alcohol, the distance, they were shields he used to hide the loneliness he never let anyone witness. And I understood something crucial. The man before me wasn't perfect. He was human, broken, learning, trying. Spring arrived with subtle warmth, sunlight spilling across the floors and garden. Damien and I were in the kitchen, working side by side on breakfast. Pancakes, slightly burnt as usual, sat on the counter. Without thinking, I brushed a smudge of flour from his cheek. He froze. His gray eyes widened, then softened. And then he did something entirely unexpected. He reached out and took my hand gently in his, not to pull me close, not to demand attention, but to hold it, quietly, intentionally. For a long moment, we just sat like that, hands touching, eyes meeting, hearts unspoken but understood. I want to be better," he said again. "Not for anyone else, not for the family, for you." "I know," I whispered, and in that whisper, I meant every word. It was gradual, almost imperceptible, a smile when he saw me laugh, a hand offered without being asked, a blanket draped over my shoulders in the middle of a chilly night, coffee made just right, pancakes attempted with care. We began to share small moments, each one weaving trust tighter, each one building a fragile intimacy neither of us had allowed ourselves before. The walls of our house didn't feel suffocating anymore. They felt safe, and for the first time since my father's death, my home felt like mine, shared with someone I could finally see, fully, without fear. One evening, the sun set with a blaze of gold and pink across the city. Damien and I sat on the balcony, the cool air brushing against our cheeks. We had been laughing about something trivial, a small domestic disaster from earlier in the day. He turned toward me, face serious now, eyes searching mine. "Lena," he said softly, his breath misting in the candlelight. I know what I did was unforgivable. That night, I broke the one promise I ever meant to keep, and I can't erase it. I can't undo it. But I've learned I can change. I've learned how to be present, how to be gentle, how to care without overstepping. And I think I might love you." The words hung between us, impossible and yet entirely real. I swallowed hard. I remembered the fear, the terror, the months of careful distance, and I also remembered the hands that brought me medicine, the bandages, the coffee, the quiet gestures that spoke louder than words ever could. Slowly, I placed my hand over his. "Damien," I said, trembling, "I don't hate you anymore, and maybe I feel something I didn't expect, something soft, something real." He let out a breath I didn't realize he'd been holding, and in that moment the house felt warmer, the silence softer, and the world outside irrelevant. From that night onward, our relationship changed fundamentally. Love didn't explode, it didn't demand itself, it grew, quietly, patiently, respectfully. We learned each other's rhythms, fears, and comforts. We argued sometimes, as any two humans do, but we always returned to respect. We laughed, cooked, fixed things, read together, and shared late-night whispers about dreams we had never dared voice. Damien never rushed me, never pressed, never demanded. And slowly, impossibly, my heart, so guarded for so long, began to soften completely. I had married for survival, but I stayed for him, for the man who had turned shame into care, arrogance into gentleness, mistakes into trust. And in the quiet moments, in the soft glances, in the gentle hands and shared laughter, I realized the truth. Love can grow even from silence, even from fear, even from broken promises. It grows when people choose to see each other, not just as partners or strangers, but as humans trying, failing, and learning to be better. And in Damien's gray eyes, I finally saw someone who could love me the way I deserved. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but honestly.